Hi viewers, welcome back to MasterJSkills. In this video, we will see about the Spring Boot exception handling. How can do the global exception handling in Spring Boot. Make sure to watch the video without skipping for more clear understanding, and please subscribe to MasterJSkills for more such great tutorials. So without making any delay, let's get started. So exception, before jumping into the Spring Boot exception handling, let's recall the our core exception handling. So what are the exceptions? Exceptions are nothing but runtime errors where there will be a problem in our application and which will stop executing our application, which will terminate execution. So to handle this particular issue, exception handling come into picture, whereas exception handling is a mechanism to handle an error. So we were using a try, catch, throw and throws clauses to handle the exception in core Java. So this is how we were handling in the exception. So whereas in Spring Boot we are handling with an annotations. So let's see how we can handle in Spring Boot. So Spring Boot provides a tool to handle an exception beyond a simple try-catch blocks. To use these tools, we apply a couple of annotation that allows us to treat exception handling as a cross-cutting concerns. Spring Boot CRUD operations REST API. So here Spring Boot provides tools to handle exceptions. So for that we can call it as a cross-cutting concerns, nothing but a common functionality. Cross-cutting concerns are nothing but a common functionalities which will be handled as a global, like it will be applicable to complete application. So this is how we can handle with the help of these tools, we can handle an exception in Spring Boot. So let's see what are those tools. It provides three tools with the help of three annotations, that is response status and exception handler and control advice. With the help of these three annotations, we can handle exception globally. Let's see what is a response status. So instead of going to this theory, we'll just look into IDE, then we'll come back to here. So more clear understanding. So I'm just switching to IDE. So I'll just open the advisor. Here is a package exception. For that, customized exception handling class. So for that I have used, you can see here, controller advice. So controller advice acts as a controller for exception handling. So for that I have a class where it is extending response entity exception handler. So it is extending response entity exception handler. At controller advice is an annotation which acts as a controller for handling an exception. So for that we have to extend response entity exception handler class. So once we extend this, we have to override the handle exceptions. For this we have to make this class as an at control advice. So this annotation makes this class as an globally handle the exception. So for that, each of the exception we have to write this exception handler class. So here you can see handle exception. I am writing this employee not found exception. This is particularly for this exception where employee is not found for particular ID. So we have to write this class like employee not found extends runtime exception. So for that we have to write a web request. So you can see the implementation itself. So here you can see handler exception, web request and exception. So exception class is our employee not found exception class. So that I am passing, and for this I have an exception response. I am forming some response called error code, message, date, time. These are the exception responses. So that I am returning as an entity, response entity. So for that I am setting, so response time, a response message as an employee not found, response error as 101. 101 is nothing but employee not found in the EMS. So I'm forming an response entity object. So I'm giving it as a not found. So entity, I'm passing it back to, I'm returning it back. So for the exception handler also, we have to annotate, we have to pass the entity not found exception, which is a class. So this is how we can handle the exception globally. And apart from this, we have to even include how we can catch this exception. You can see if employee is equal to null, I am throwing this employee not found exception only, this exception. So how it will be caught? It will be caught here and handled in this without try catch block. Instead of try catch, it will be handled inside here. So whenever we want, we can just make, we can throw that exception here. I can show you here as well. I have thrown just for an example. For demo purpose, I have done. See here, either I can throw runtime exception, employee ID not found exception ID, and here I'm throwing this runtime. So either this or that. So before that, I'll just make it as an. So I'll copy this, paste it over here. So before going for this, I will just comment this. So without exception handling, how the application behaves, let's see. So I'm running this application, and meanwhile I'll open Postman. So our application is up and running on 8083. So I deliberately throw an exception. Let's call this method by ID. Let's call this API deliberately throw an exception. So here 2 I am passing because 2 is not existed. So it will throw internal employee ID not found. So it will throw as internal server error. So here as well, you can see, because the ID we are not handling, we are just throwing it. So when if you think on core Java, core exception handling, when it is thrown, it has to be catched. It has to catch and handle. So you can see here it is throwing an exception. It is throwing the same exception in client as well as in server. So how we can handle with an global exception handling, Spring Boot exception handling is with the controller at controller advice. So I am just, what I did, just I have uncommented this, and in the controller we have to throw this exception. I'll comment this, and so here actually when either of one places I can throw, because here I can throw that exception and create that exception in the controller itself, but made it just to understand much deeper, I have throwing it in the service as well as in the controller. So this is done. I have saved it, and let's see it's updated or not. And it's updated. So I am sending this. So you can see it is not throwing any exception. It's handled with the at controller advice. So this is how we can handle the exceptions in the Spring Boot. So let's jump into the theoretical part. So at response status, as the name suggests, at response status allows us to modify the HTTP status of our response. It can be applied in the following places: on exception class itself, along with at exception handler annotation method, along with the at controller advice annotation on classes like response body. Let's apply here. So you can see here I have applied. Instead of that, we can even include here. See here, you can see there is only one exception it's handling. So then you can send this response to the class level. Instead of that, instead of when we are handling more than one exception, then we can apply it on the method as well. So here you can see for class, this is for, so here how I have included HTTP status not found, like for method as well we can include. So the response status in combination with the server.error configuration properties allows us to manipulate almost all the fields in the Spring defined error response payload. So there are some of the configuration in the application.properties as well. So these are the errors. Server.error include messages always. So here we can include whether we have to include always or false or sometimes. So it has some values. So we can include these properties, like including server.error configuration. So in combination with the server.error configuration properties allows us to manipulate almost all the fields in our Spring defined error response payload. So this is always I have here I am including the message always, that is error response in the server. So include binding errors and include stack trace, whatever we want to include while handling, that we can mention in the properties. So next is exception handler, which we have saw in the controller, advice controller. The exception handler annotation gives us a lot of flexibility in terms of handling exceptions. For starters, to use it, we simply need to create a method either in the controller itself or in a controller advice class and annotate it with the exception handler. So you can see in the advice controller, I have used an exception handler where you can see even in the REST controller as well I have used it. So you can see here the same method I have included here as well. We can include either in the controller advice or in the REST controller itself. This is how we can handle it. So next is controller advice. So controller advice is a class allows us to apply its exception handler to more than one or all controllers in our application. If we want to selectively apply or limit the scope of a controller advice to a particular controller or a package, we can use the properties provided by the annotation. If we want this particular advice to be handled globally, then no need to apply any packages. So if we want to apply this complete controller of this particular exception, then we can mention the package like this. If we want this particular exception or this advice to be handled on complete application, then no need to specify any property. But if we want this advice to be used by a particular controller, like employee controller or particular this package, then we can specify. We can pass a package name or a list of package names in the annotation value or a base package parameter. With this, the controller advice will only handle exception for this package controller. So we can even specify packages or a class. At controller annotation advice dot class, only the controllers marked with a at advice annotation will be handled by the controller advice. So at controller with annotation advice dot class, for this only the controller marked with at advice annotation will be handled by the controller advice. So this is how at controller advice we can use it. So this is quite simple how we can handle the exceptions in the global exceptions in the Spring Boot. So this is how we can handle it, all the exceptions. So that's all about the Spring Boot exception handling. If you have any doubts, please drop in the comment box. I'll make sure to clear all your doubts. And if you like this video, please give me a thumbs up and please subscribe to MasterJSkills. I'll catch you guys in the next video. Thanks again for watching.